Hi, Antti.
Hello.
Many of us already know each other, probably, with who's watching, but if you don't know us, my name's Arleta, and I've got Antti Savilaakso with me. We are part of the team at Impact Cubed, working on impact data and analytics. And aside from our normal sort of client interactions and content creation, we are thinking of starting this series of short videos just to tackle one topic very quickly. And one of the topics that is very timely at the moment is SFDR, the latest installments in the glut of regulation events that we've had throughout 2020, which has replaced a little bit the taxonomy, which has reigned supreme in compliance departments and ESG teams most of 2020. But SFDR has been, well, there's been a lot of confusion around the timelines, but it's always felt quite short. So I think the last quarter of 2020, a lot of data providers like us have done little else other than fill in RFPs based on the technical requirements of the SFDR as they were published for the last consultation. But there's still a lot that's in flux. And so we're going to talk today about the timeline, about what is still up for discussion or subject to changes, and what extent of a challenge we can expect with SFDR, both for mainstream managers for whom this will be binding if they're selling or operating in Europe, and ESG managers that are perhaps used to reporting on at least some of these requirements already, or with similar frameworks. So to just kick us off, Antti, can you give us like a baseline of where the European Commission is actually at the moment with SFDR?
Yeah, sure. So the SFDR is part of the green finance package. There's a lot of different kind of initial or kind of independent initiatives out there. The SFDR being the one, the disclosure related regulation for all the financial market participants, basically asset managers and investors who operate in Europe. So not only domiciled in Europe, but operate in Europe, sell their services in Europe. And the SFDR, the high-level package was agreed in mid-2019. Part of that package was that the deal was that the ESAs, the European supervisory authorities, conduct a joint consultation of the mechanics, of the technicalities of that disclosure regulation through the 2020, and agrees on that by end of 2020, so that it will be ready for everybody to use starting 2021. So the consultation was launched in I think late spring, maybe April or May 2020, and it closed end of September, I think. And by or that was the end of October, the Commission kind of basically outside that, look, we're not gonna agree. There's not gonna be an RTS, regulatory technical standard. It's not gonna be ready by the end of year as we agreed. It's gonna be postponed until further notice. How long? Nobody knows. But it's gonna come out at some point. Meanwhile, the high level text kind of still stands, which basically means that on a higher level, the financial market participants in Europe have to start disclosing their various different sustainable finance related things starting March. So gathering information on March, and then the first periodic reports, so annual reports are due to be out by mid 2022. So there's a kind of a year period to kind of gather the necessary information.
Yeah, and the technical standards themselves have elicited quite a lively response in the consultation. There's a lot in them. Well, there's a lot in them that is very familiar, very well defined, and then there's things that are a big question mark. Proportion of securities that are certified as green or social. What does that mean? Is that a reference to the taxonomy? Is that a reference to green bonds? Certified by who? There's requirements or metrics that are very clearly not really applicable to all portfolios and all types of assets. And they represent more a sort of wish list theme than something that is measurable in very concrete terms. for a regulation that is, becoming binding for large groups of asset managers on quite a short notice. So, what have been some of the responses from the industry in the consultation, and considering all of these issues with the standards that have been identified, can we expect the standards to actually survive to when they become binding with a list of these 30 odd? What is your best guess as to what might change?
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I mean, this EU consultation on sustainable finance related stuff certainly seemed to draw a lot of criticism, right? Same thing with the taxonomy, and this is no surprise there. I don't know how much they usually draw a criticism, kind of a general consultation, but I've read through the kind of a lot of the SFDR related questions and concerns, and there's quite a lot of that. A lot of those revolve around the indicators, like you mentioned. There's actually kind of a broader technical standard, but at the heart of that, or that at least perceived as a heart of that consultation, there's a list of 32 indicators, 16 social and 16 environmental kind of indicators under principal adverse impact that are mandatory for every asset manager to report on. So and that set of 32 indicators are the ones that kind of draw the most criticism. And yeah, I mean, quite a few of those indicators are something that I think the industry, there's plenty available. Industry is already kind of accustomed in using, and a lot of that will survive. But I see a very small chance that the kind of all of it would sustain itself or would stand as it speaks. They're just kind of for numerous different reasons, like not only us speaking, but kind of summarizing the bit of the feedback. Feedback there is that the one is that a lot of the suggested indicators are simply not fit for purpose. Like, even though you would agree that, okay, your adverse impact on human rights or deforestation has to be monitored by investors, the suggested indicators just don't make any sense. Like the only deforestation related indicator is a deforestation policy, and one would argue that, well, whether someone who's a participant or has a kind of a potentially adverse impact in deforestation, whether they have a policy around it or not, doesn't really mean much. Data availability is another one. Like, there's a lot of indicators that are suggested that simply doesn't exist. There's a kind of a average financial market participant holds hundreds, if not thousands, of companies in their portfolios, and these indicators, as reported by the companies, would be available for kind of a couple of dozen. So, I mean, what's the use of an indicator where the kind of or if the indicator is very aspirational, I suppose it's a good word to describe it. It's not particularly fit for purpose again. Plus the timeline, of course. I mean, it's a very, very aggressive timeline. Kind of thinking of starting from a high-level text, a year, including a kind of almost a half-a-year consultation, and then kind of basically a year of time of basically agreeing on a set of indicators that captures that adverse impact is a very ambitious timeline indeed.
Yep. So, considering all of the anticipated changes, we haven't put out any numbers, but we agree that not all of the indicators will survive. And drawing the difference between the main text and the technical standards, what can we expect to be a challenge, and is it sort of insurmountable to the degree that the SFDR basically needs to change? And what's the difference here between mainstream managers and ESG managers that have been already reporting under the UN PRI framework, or their own quantitative reporting?
Yeah, so I would, it's difficult to put the number, but my guess is that the less than half of the 32 indicators are something that are kind of reasonably well established. There's some kind of is maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit more than a half would be that are relatively established indicators, and there's enough market participants to kind of basically provide that. Then there's a handful of indicators that kind of exist, provided only by one or two players in the market. And I suppose you can, whatever you want to think about the idea that they're about to kind of mandate something that only one market or two market participants can provide. It's a little bit awkward. And then there's just kind of a few that are very small chance of survival. But my guess would be that within the next year, I suppose, there will be a kind of a RTS that handles not 32, but maybe maybe 15, somewhere between 10 and 20. 15 is a good guess of those indicators. Now, in a broader scheme of things, the idea of disclosure or disclosing the how does one's operations as a financial market participant linked to a sustainable development, I think the broader idea is there. The high level text kind of talks about disclosure and talks about the need of describing policies and approaches and stuff like that. So it's not going to be a big difference for people who already do ESG or sustainable finance or responsible investments, because most of them are already PRI signatories, and the PRI signatories have the mandatory reporting requirement that already kind of requires everybody to, disclose their policies and approaches and give some kind of anecdotal cases and so on. So it's not going to be that big of a change. If you're a big player and you've done responsible investment before and you've communicated your responsible investment efforts before, complying with the SFDR is not going to be in a high level text. I mean, like complying with the high level text, that comply or explain structure is not going to be a massive stretch. It just requires of you to be able to recycle and maybe retune a bit of the stuff that you've done already. If you haven't done anything, then it's a different case, because then obviously comply or explain, I mean, technically, if you have a good explanation why you haven't done ESG thus far, then you just, as long as you have a good reason, you're complying with the regulation. But I think the spirit of the regulation kind of expects every financial market participant to do something within the ESG. So
yeah, that's definitely the signal.
Yeah, there's a little bit of more work there.
And for sustainability managers who have been reporting, I mean, yeah, even the frameworks such as the PRI and even, often kind of award-winning best practice sustainability reporting for asset managers does or can have the tendency to be quite qualitative, which is why, we're also saying the main text of SFDR is not actually that unfamiliar, because a lot of it does focus on just explaining what your approach is and then illustrating with a few anecdotes. But the technical requirements, they are really data points that need to be quantified and reported across potentially very diversified portfolios. So from that perspective, it's also quite a step up for potentially a lot of sustainability managers as well, right? Yeah,
absolutely correct. Yeah, and there's absolutely correct. There's this tendency of established managers, talk about their policies and approaches on a very qualitative way, and then when asked or when they have a need to describe the quality of their portfolio, it's often done by cherry picking of one or two companies out of a portfolio of, let's say, 150, 200, 300 companies, kind of describing a very strong sustainability-minded narrative about the qualities of that. But the SFDR for ESG, particularly for the fund managers that market their funds as an ESG-related green, clean, sustainable, responsible, or something along those lines, it kind of requires them to quantify it at the portfolio level, which is a step change in thinking in a way, that because now it's not enough for you to kind of cherry pick of one or two companies there. You need to be able to kind of on a portfolio level to address the portfolio's key differences against its reference point, often a benchmark. So the kind of a quantifying on a portfolio level is a big step change in thinking and in prevailing practice.
And also this is very clearly a regulatory disclosure in the sense that it's not just almost a marketing exercise where you're highlighting the things that you're doing and the things that are shining examples of sustainability in your portfolio. You're actually looking methodically for the adverse impacts, right, and reporting holistically in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, we've argued along those lines for a long time in a way that the sustainability in a way it comes in various different shapes and sizes and so on. There's not a single company that would be a kind of a super clean, super good on every possible facet. It's very, very typical that every company that you invest in and every portfolio comprised of those companies, have their positive sides and negative sides, and I think the regulatory drive towards of being objective and open about the shortcomings as well is a very good approach.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. There's trade-offs everywhere you look, and there's no point pretending otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we've basically established that there's two parts to SFDR. There's been a lot of attention on the technical standards, but those are actually still in flux. It's quite unlikely that they will be binding in the form that they are published in right now. The existing requirements, though, will be a new thing for mainstream managers. Yes, of course. That's not to say that in 2020 we don't have a lot of resources already at hand for developing an RF policy, or at least eloquently arguing why you don't have one. And then for sustainability managers, there is likely to be a little bit of a qualitative difference in the reporting, where under voluntary frameworks or under sort of almost marketing reporting of sustainability, there is more of a focus on highlights and more of a focus on the reporting that suits that particular strategy specifically, whereas we see with the SFDR that it is very much a regulatory reporting framework that will take into account holistically both the social and environmental negative impacts, not just what's good and what sells effectively about an ESG product. So yeah, thanks, Antti. Anyone who watches this first installment and wants to continue the conversation, of course, please do reach out to us. Either direct message us on LinkedIn or find us via the website. And any suggestions for next topics are very welcome. We have a few ideas, but we'd also welcome anyone's input. Thanks for now.
Excellent.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
Antti.